so grateful to have Alec here, helping us continue our Advocacy Day as we learn more about social justice and advocacy from the NSCSW perspective. Alec, thank you for spending the morning advocating out there and then coming back here to help us continue to advocate.
Thanks so much, Naj. I'm always delighted to speak to folks about advocacy and how we need to ground ourselves in a collective voice for the type of change we need to see in the world. This morning, I did have the privilege of being down at Law Amendments Committee to present on the Financial Measures Act, which is an omnibus bill that included a lot of different provisions. One of the most important being finally, after decades, an office for children and youth, which will function as a child youth advocate office. So I went, as well as other members of our community, to present on the desperate need for this advocate office in consideration of the real difficulties in delivering child welfare practices across the province at this point in time. So again, we were able to organize a collective voice. We were able to ground our positions and narrative in framework, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. And we are certainly hopeful and grateful that we finally saw at least the grounding provisions for this new office to come on board. And we know it'll have a substantial impact as it has in other areas. I'm going to share my screen because I do have an updated presentation for you all. Is that showing okay? Perfect.
Yes.
So I want to talk, and I've been invited to talk about the college's social policy framework, which is entitled Creating the Future We All Deserve, a social policy framework for Nova Scotia. So as folks know, the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers has a number of different provisions and rules, all tied to ensuring public safety, particularly in the delivery of social work practice. One of the ways that we know we must do that is to influence how social policy is created and crafted in Nova Scotia. So through the work of the Social Policy Committee and our partnership with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, we launched the Social Policy Framework. I don't know if it's ironic or if it is some kind of omen, but the day we launched the Social Policy Framework was the day that they declared the global pandemic. So again, as we saw the social inequities and inequalities that certainly existed and were certainly became more glaring during the pandemic, social policy framework became a tool in which we could start to ground our vision for the type of advocacy in Nova Scotia that we needed to do. So let me talk a little bit about it and the thinking behind it. What I'm going to try and do in about 40 minutes today is to talk about the role of the college, which I just did, to talk about, again, the current political climate, the importance of finding our moral courage and bravery, as Cindy Blackstock refers to it as, in pursuit of social change, and then looking at the principles within the social policy framework. We'll talk, if we have time, a little bit about the practical application of it. But I wanted to start about, of course, the role of advocacy and why it's so important. Now, advocacy is a loaded term, but for many, we often hear, "Oh, we don't. You're not supposed to do advocacy," or we want a specific type of advocacy, client-centered. We often negate the need for and have marginalized the need for a consistent and persistent voice for change. Advocacy involves actions aimed at influencing public policy and resource allocations within the political, economic, and social system, and ensures that people, particularly those that are the most vulnerable in society, can have their voice heard on issues that are important to them, defend, safeguard their rights, and have their views and wishes generally considered. There is a real clear distinction that we do want to make, is that often activities that look like advocacy get framed as lobbying. I think there's a clear distinction between lobbying and advocacy. Advocacy is in the public's interest. Lobbying is in personal interest or some kind of elite interest. Advocacy is really important in terms of a framework to be able to continue to push for the type of change. And in fact, it is the only way to achieve change. We have decades of history right now to show that the only real way to create the type of society that we want is through a consistent pressuring of ideas, of policies, the continued clashing of, again, different political positions to be able to ultimately sway public opinion and place public pressure towards the type of change we need to see. One of the more useful theories that I find when we're conceptualizing public policy is what's known as the Overton window. It's a model for understanding how public policy comes about. It defines a range of policies politically acceptable to mainstream population at any given time. The Overton window was developed by a conservative strategist in the States, John Overton, which recognized that public policy, that which government might implement, regardless of what political party is in power or what their ideology might be, there's a given window of public opinion. And so a political party is only going to be able to achieve public policy as far left or as far right as that public opinion will allow it to. If governments start to stand outside of that, they start to lose their mandate to govern. So what really is important is recognizing that the role of advocacy is to either expand or shift that window of public opinion. How you end up doing that is by continually being involved in public and political discourse, educating and mobilizing those towards that public opinion. Ideas that might be considered radical or unthinkable, such as the expansion of the social policy framework, the regulation of the private housing market. Those ideas right now are really seen as unthinkable. The more we continue to talk about them in the political and public discourse, through media, social media gatherings such as this, the more acceptable those ideas start to become. And we start to shift that window of public opinion towards these ideas being acceptable and eventually public policy. What I can tell you in my years of advocacy, and an example of that is the Office of Children and Youth, which we saw today, is that it is persistence that often wins the day. Never budging, never giving an inch in terms of your effort to achieve something, recognizing that there's going to be a push and pull, that ultimately you may be ignored, it may not be considered, but the continuation of something that we truly believe in, the continued pressure and raising it within the political discourse, that persistence is ultimately what has proven to be something that will allow us to implement the type of policy that we know we need towards the betterment of our society. So let's talk about the current political context a little bit and why the social policy framework was designed to counter this. Ultimately, again, we have been living in a period of great and widening inequality based on, again, the premise of neoliberalism, which is what it was intended to do when it was implemented in the early 80s. So we've now had almost 4 decades of it, and today we feel the absolute worst of that implementation of that policy development. Well, we continue to hear rhetoric regarding affordability and cost of living crisis. That poorly frames the current crises which we are in. The reality is that the cost of living affordability issues are symptoms of rising inequality. The reality is that we've created a society of have and have-nots, with those who have significantly influencing their wealth as well as their ability to influence public policy. It impacts inequity, where again, racialized and marginalized communities are most often left out, and it lowers trust. We lack the social solidarity at this moment in time to tackle some of the largest issues around the climate crisis, the housing crisis, and in healthcare, because we have such an unequal footing in our society in terms of how power is translated. It has continued to entrench the patriarchy, again, where we continue to see norms that prioritize, again, rational thought over emotional thought. And the reality is that that's a false choice. To be rational is to be emotional. To be emotional is to be rational. There is no distinction there. The diminished value of care is what is at the root of that entrenched patriarchy, where we continue to see pay equity for women, racialized groups continue to lag behind, where again, we're looking at the teacher strike moving up, as well as other generalized strikes, in which there'll be continued narrative undervaluing the role that care has in our society as we enter in to that turmoil of labor negotiations. I often hear both the minister and deputy minister, whoever they are, of the Department of Community Services go in front of legislative committees and talk about the delivery of child welfare by social workers in this province being among the toughest and most complex jobs in our society. When you look at the pay scale within the NSGU collective agreement, child welfare workers are among the lowest. That doesn't add up in terms of value, and it demonstrates that we've continued to undervalue care in our society. And while we currently have a government that is in some ways boshing austerity policies, recognizing the need to spend, we are also seeing the impact of austerity policies towards corporate power, centralized bureaucratic systems, and the continued rise of managerialism, which devalues professional skills for business efficiency, and ultimately sidelining the need for human connection. In this context is a need for a robust vision of the type of system that we could have and should have if we are to see the realization of the full potential of every citizen in Nova Scotia, and everyone who comes across, who comes into the province. The reality is that this paradigm has been fundamentally devastating to the well-being of many, and that cost of living, that affordability that we've seen is a direct rise of this particular paradigm. It's important to note that although many of us feel the struggle and the pinch of the current system, many have flourished and have enriched themselves. We've seen some of the wealthiest people in the world's wealth double come out of the pandemic, and that has to do with the continued systemic exploitation of labor, of care, and the diminishing of human connection. Again, I have some data, and this data is outdated now because it's from 2018. But there's always this narrative that Nova Scotia is a have-not province, or that we don't have the same wealth disparities that other provinces have. The reality is that the income of the top 10 have grown since 1998 to 2018 by about 12%. And of course, the income share of the bottom have declined. This data shows and demonstrates that things have gotten worse since the pandemic. But we do know that in 2018, the top income share had 16.3 times that of the bottom share of income earners, which demonstrates, again, the real flaw in our current logic within our systems, as well as lays out the dire consequences of what happens when we have that kind of inequality. If you haven't, highly recommend picking up a book called The Spirit Level, which was written by Jonathan Wilkinson and Kate Pickett in around 2009. Their groundbreaking work examined inequality in OECD countries across the board, and demonstrated very clearly with data the devastating effects of inequality. And the positive impacts of equality. What their research clearly demonstrates is that societies that are more equal do better in almost every indicator, in terms of health, well-being, justice, education, lower crime, better able to tackle greater problems. One of the challenges of our current province's approach to many of our issues, healthcare being one, is that we continue to try and take an approach that focuses on the individual and that focuses on supply of healthcare, which we're never ever going to be able to deliver if the demand for healthcare continues to grow at the pace that it has. In order to tackle that and to truly actually build a healthcare system that we need, at the root, we have to be addressing equality and rising income inequality. There's never been more of a desperate time to be able to start to impact that growing disparity between the have and the have not. So let's talk about the vision of the social policy framework. Again, the vision was just that it would create a roadmap, a set of principles that we all could utilize to help create the vision on a number of different project areas or policy areas to tackle inequality, to build greater human connection, and to see greater well-being across the province. There are a number of core principles within it. One, the need for an inclusive economy. Um, it advocates for wealth redistribution, economic policies that benefit the entire population, and ensures that political decisions favor the common good over elite interests. Again, the policy framework creates a vision for public good and sustainability. It emphasizes climate justice, healthcare, social services enhancement, and the importance of decolonization and professional care through public policy. And ultimately, it aims to promote collaboration and healing. Promotes policies developed through collaboration, through an intersectional approach to foster participatory communities and address systemic oppression by encouraging sharing and healing together. Ultimately, again, what we hope the social policy framework allows us to do as social workers in particular is to find our moral courage and to use that moral courage to create the type of change that we need to see. Cindy Blackstock defines moral courage as getting into trouble for doing the right thing. The resolve to act rightly, especially when faced with potential backlash. And again, anyone who's been an advocate will find that there is some kind of backlash in the work that you do. Generally, those with power who benefit from the status quo are attuned to the fact that there are ideas or policies moving forward that may influence their power and diminish their role. We have to be conscious of that and support one another in that, but recognizing again that we must continue to find and act through that moral lens. Again, social work itself and the ethical tensions that exist have to do with that neoliberal paradigm and the inability to care for clients because of the systems that we have created. So essential to the role of social work and our ethics is advocating for improved services, even if it means confronting peers, superiors, or other folks who may not disagree or may not appreciate the lens being brought forward. We have to have, and we hope the social policy framework enables the ability to have what Cindy Blackstock refers to as courageous conversations, boldly voicing personal or professional ethics despite what that opposition may look like. Again, this is crucial to the type of change that we need to see, and social workers are well positioned to be having these courageous conversations, getting into trouble for the right reasons, and finding that moral courage to be able to create the type of change that we need to. So let's talk about the 10 interconnected principles of the social policy framework. So at the root of the social policy framework is an intersectional lens, recognizing again that both professionals and service users, communities are impacted by systems differently based on their interlocking identities of oppression and privilege. Recognizing, again, these are in ourselves, in our peers, in our communities is essential to applying social policy in a way that creates well-being. Also, again, we look at policy that is research and evidence informed. There is, again, overwhelming evidence in many cases. I'll give you an example that eliminating poverty or substantially moving people out of poverty has a substantial impact on health and well-being, as well as the need for other services. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives identified a number of years ago that the cost to our society, to Nova Scotia, for having the deep-rooted policy or having the deep-rooted poverty that exists here costs us around $2 billion a year, either by having excessive services that are not needed to deal with the impact of poverty, or through a loss of productivity. What we know in Canada right now economically is that we continue to struggle with a productivity crisis, meaning that we have a lot of inputs and our outputs aren't matching pace. That has to do in many cases with the fact, particularly in Nova Scotia, that we've created a low wage workforce. Folks aren't properly compensated, that we haven't put in the right technical inputs to be able to provide greater productivity. And ultimately, what analysis are starting to see is that a lot of capital has been parked in housing, not necessarily in investing in a productive economy. What that's meant, of course, is created the housing crisis, but it's also created a context where poverty continues to fester, impacting a lot of different broad areas of our society. Again, that evidence-based and intersectional thinking is then grounded and put through the lens of 10 interconnected principles that we need to view policy from. And the idea of the social policy framework is it can be used to propose new policy or analyze policy that's being moved forward. Ultimately, it's the goal to look at what is happening and propose solutions based on these 10 grounding principles. And the first that we start with is interconnectedness, recognizing the interconnectedness of policies and issues that are interconnected across societal issues. Again, one of the greatest economic policies that we can introduce is universal, accessible, high quality childcare. This is an example of an interconnected issue. We know that when there is universal high quality childcare, it empowers women to enter the workforce, that it encourages care and of vulnerable children and youth to, maybe catch some vulnerabilities early, provide early intervention. Overall, the benefit overwhelmingly, it strengthens our economy and our overall well-being. It's a great example of an interconnected policy. Diverse policy impact, understanding that individuals experience policies differently based on their unique positions with the intersecting systems. Interconnectedness points to the need to break down silos, the importance of cross-sectoral collaboration to address complex challenges effectively. And ultimately, interconnectedness provides comprehensive policy development, aiming to create policies that simultaneously tackle multiple issues at once, fostering more inclusive and impactful solutions. An example of that would be housing policy that builds units towards environmental standards and energy efficiency. We can both tackle the housing crisis and the climate crisis at the same time if we were to employ a lens that looked to do both at the same time. Decolonization is another incredibly important principle that we need to continue to uphold and push for. Part of this means rejecting government paternalism, transitioning towards empowerment and self-determination for Indigenous communities, as well as confronting the colonial legacies, actively addressing and rectifying the impacts of colonialism through informed policy. Adopting Indigenous informed policy includes, of course, embedding the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in policy decisions, enacting and reviewing policies around Jordan's principles, ensuring that all Indigenous children have access to the services that they need, and, of course, the National Inquiry call for justice into missing and murdered Indigenous women. There's a roadmap, recommendations, policies, still many that have not been implemented today, that help us with our journey towards decolonization. Social inclusion becomes another imperative social policy. Again, recognizing and tackling entrenched obstacles in policies, programs, and services. It's interesting, there's been a research study floated around the internet regarding activity and exercise that demonstrate the equivalence of being on I'm going to forget the name, even though it's top of my head. The medication that reduces anxiety, that type of anxiety. There's evidence to show that dancing, regularly and equivalently reduces anxiety to the same amount that some of those medications have. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, of course, we know the benefits of physical activity, but one of the things that dancing has that many other social or that many other activities may not, is there's a huge social component to it. There's a human connection component to it. The reality is that connection makes a huge difference in terms of how we view the world and are connected to the world. It means continuing to confront historical injustices rooted in the legacy of racism and the continuation of slavery and colonization. Enhancing accessibility, making sure that folks with multiple different abilities are able to enjoy and take part in society. Promoting equality, again, recognizing and challenging gender-based and heteronormative biases, and ultimately supporting vulnerable populations to be included in our society. Universality becomes a very important principle that we need to be looking at social policy through. We currently do not. Universality would be most common for folks in terms of how we deliver healthcare, where anyone can technically, I'll say technically, anyone can walk into their healthcare provider and receive services without a fee or costs. Or without having a defined set of needs. Social policy doesn't operate that way. It's still very targeted. This is one of the challenges that we have, particularly in the vision in delivering child and family well-being programming, where you have to still often be means tested to access it or provide a certain need. Imagine if we set up a social service system where anyone who is struggling with their, particularly with child and family issues, could find a service that met their needs, wouldn't have to deal with the stigma or discrimination that comes from seeking targeted services, and that was available without fees paid for through taxes and other progressive tax systems. And there would be a right to access, no need for the market to be provided. Universality is a really crucial principle that we need to look at in the provision of care. We have a very tiny window to address the existential crisis of climate change. What we have to recognize, and honestly, the policy that we've put in place really is a failure to recognize the need for climate justice. It was well noted that when the federal government was introducing the carbon levy, that this was going to have detrimental impacts on middle income earners and low income earners for a number of reasons. One, that upfront cost. In addition, the social solidarity was not there to be able to have a carbon tax as the sole policy working in this regards. Now, a price on pollution is absolutely essential, but the carbon tax was essentially set up to sustain neoliberalism, looking at, again, individual power of the market to shift and change discourse. What we need, again, is a climate justice lens, preventing marginalized groups from bearing the burden of the transition away from this hardship. Right now, again, they are bearing the brunt of it, and that needs to fundamentally change. It means tackling things like environmental racism and investing in inclusion policies. What we have continued to pitch is a revision of the Marshall Report, which in the 1950s laid the groundwork for what was once a modern and flourishing social safety net when the economy was transitioning from a war-based economy to a post-war economy. We need to socialize the risk of climate change and make sure that those who have been the highest polluters, which is the top 20% of income earners, pay for the transition away, making sure that the most vulnerable are not harmed or hurt. Decent work and well-being becomes another really important principle, recognizing again that a lot of the care, a lot of the labor that is provided in our society is done for free, usually by women. And we continue to lay that down as a policy option or choice that is beyond unreasonable at this point in time. We need to ensure, again, that we're tackling precarious employment. The rise of the gig economy has been detrimental to our overall impact on equality. With low-income precarious work that usually comes without protections, without pensions, without benefits. We need to really be looking at how do we shift and change that. Caregiving has to be an essential part of the economy, particularly one that embraces climate justice. Naomi Klein wrote in her book, This Changes Everything, that the green economy is the caring economy, one where we recognize caregiving as a crucial role in terms of our economic output, productivity, and ultimately as a way to enhance social and collective well-being. We have to invest in social programs. Again, a universal basic income is not a solution or not a catch-all to dealing with the complex problems that we deal with. We have to recognize that the provision of social programs such as housing, pharmacare, transportation, remove those from the delivery of the from the market delivery to public delivery will help play a substantial role towards greater equality and well-being. And ultimately, we need to promote work-life balance. It's long overdue. The time for a 4-day work week is now. We need to recognize that, again, our technology has shifted how we work, and workers need to bear the benefit of that by being able to have more time at home and recreation, caring for their loved ones and themselves. We need to recognize that services need to be delivered through the public provision. As we continue to see healthcare in this province privatized, that leads to real challenges, of course, in accountability. And ultimately, we know that public services are far more resilient. That means it's far less, it's harder for a government to come in and cut a public program than it is to cut a program being offered by an NGO or a private system. They have more resilience, they have more accountability, and ultimately they provide a greater quality of care. We have to continue to look at the public provision as being a meaningful output. And we have to remember too that one of the reasons why we don't particularly like or see public provision as a tool right now is because the neoliberal paradigm has strategically and structurally devalued public provision, either by systemically underfunding them until those systems fall into decay, or pushing a constant narrative of inefficiency. Neither of those are both deliberate in their attempts to devalue public provision so that they can be privatized. Neither are true either. We can have a mental health and addiction system that is responsive to folks' needs, that is responsive to provisional needs that can be delivered through public provision. What we need to able to achieve that is a vision for what that could look like. And just simply opening up MSI billing to private practitioners is not a solution that's going to lead to universal access to mental health. It's going to create more chaos than it is going to benefit. And ultimately, what we need to see is a strengthening of public services and public provision. Fiscal fairness, the data on inequality really shows this, is that we over time have created a tax system that benefits particularly, and this has been proven many times, men. We know capital gains tax, which is taxed at 50%, used to be taxed at 100%, is a tax benefit that costs government revenue billions of dollars and almost exclusively benefits wealthy men, no one else. We need progressive taxation. That means taxing the rich and the wealthy and putting in mechanisms to be able to ensure that a massive amount of wealth that's being gathered is no longer allowed, and that wealth is redistributed across the board. We also have to reject the notion of scarcity. The reality is that we are an incredibly rich society. Nova Scotia is an incredibly rich province. Our economy is worth almost 45 billion at this point in time. We've created policies that do not allow for everyone to benefit in that wealth. That is something that needs to change. And of course, the framing of that needs to focus on abundance, not scarcity. That is to say, when someone says, oh, we don't have enough to do that, we do have it. Like, again, the provision of public housing. Right now, it's saying we don't have enough money to be able to do that. Well, when we change public taxation to progressive, we can demonstrate how we can build 33,000 non-market housing units within the next 10 years. It is achievable, but we have to change the framework from scarcity to abundance. And we need to have a responsive resource allocation. Shared governance becomes incredibly important as well. Right now, we still see government structures rooted in a federalism where there are clear jurisdictional boundaries. We see governments saying, you see this all the time in housing, where the municipality is saying, oh, this isn't our responsibility, it's the province's responsibility. Seeing the province say, oh, it's not our responsibility, it's the federal government's responsibility. The reality is that there needs to be a framework for shared governance, recognizing that each layer has an important role to play, including, of course, First Nations governance, and that it needs to be accountable with national standards that works to embrace the social safety net. I know I'm talking very quickly, but that's because I have a limited amount of time and want to engage in conversation as well. Democratization. We continually see this government in Nova Scotia is particularly bad at this, where we are taking away democratic processes and entrenching them in the hands of a few, so that decisions are made by a few people rather than, again, us collectively. We need inclusive participation, guaranteeing everyone has a significant role in shaping our social policy. Advocacy and the role of civil society needs to be grown. Right now, many not-for-profit organizations feel that their hands are bound in terms of being able to advocate for system change because their funding comes from government and they're fearful that they might lose that. Moving to core funding models, entrenching the ability for these non-government organizations to advocate becomes a solution to that. We know our system of democracy is one that is dated. Electoral reform is badly needed in order to ensure that our voices and our votes matter more so than ever. The first past the post system is one whose time has come and gone at this point in time. And Canadians support that as well. We just haven't seen a government support it at this point in time. We need to look at the social impact of policies as well as ensure that community engagement moves forward. And ultimately, we need to start to empower workers, promoting worker ownership as well as unionization. Again, when we look at when income inequality was at its least, that was when union power was at its strongest. Now, we also have to recognize that when income inequality was at its best, the union movement almost, no, not almost, deliberately excluded racialized practitioners and workers from that movement, which ultimately led to the decay and the loss of the labor movement. So when we talk about growing the movement again, front and center needs to be equity and making sure that we're including everyone into the collective action of the unionization process, which is critical and is one of the only forces that has ever been able to stand up to corporate greed and power, is unionization. I think that's my last slide.
So now we're going to have a chance to hear from Paul, who is another one of our many amazing social workers. And Paul is going to share a little bit about some of his advocacy work. And as he introduces himself, I'm going to go and share the screen so that we can be inspired to find a way. Perhaps you're feeling like super stressed out, but you, yeah, so hopefully you are inspired to act. And now Paul's going to give us yet another way that we can turn our frustrations and anger and grief into advocacy and justice for all humans.
Thank you, Naj, for inviting me to participate. I represent the Advocates for the Care of the Elderly, and I also represent a parent who has lost an adult child to unfortunately to a motorcycle accident, but I lift hands of respect to all of the parents who also lost children. Today we're talking about children who were lost around adult children to around mental health issues. Probably another group that has been disappeared is seniors who live in long-term care And so I want to talk about that, but use all of this to maybe provide some tools and some practical ways that people might take their thoughts and emotions and their commitment to justice and social work ethics and find a way to put that to work. So if we could have the second slide, please. Okay, so every advocacy organization has an origin story, and the ACE team's story starts with an aging mother, Dory McLeod, a son, Gary McLeod, and his experience of his mother's substandard medical care when she became an alternate level of care patient in hospital in Halifax, and the care and the equipment, the beds, the whole ward, and the care itself was so substandard that it contributed to her declining physical and mental health. And through this experience, Gary learned that something he had no idea. Long-term care was not even included in Canada's so-called universal healthcare system. Next slide. And so he brought together various folks to look at this issue. But not every advocacy group is able to thrive over 18 years. And I would be remiss if I said that, in fact, the ACE team thrived at every moment. But when you don't thrive, it's important that you hold on and you wait for a better day, because if you go away, it's really hard to rebuild what you at least have. Secondly, that you remember your long-term goals, and for the ACE team, that's been quality living conditions for Nova Scotians living in long-term care. And that we think of all of the issues of health, so addressing mental health issues like the overuse of medication, like mood stabilizing management via what they call the medication straitjacket. That we remember that we're up against really closed systems, especially in long-term care, with total power and the ability to isolate. So this is a big system that's hard to navigate, hard to address, and that we approach all of it, physical and mental health issues, as a social justice issue. So what are the keys to surviving and thriving? Some of this is lighthearted, but it doesn't hurt to have a good name. It's important to have tenacious leaders, and it reminds me of that song, like a tree planted by the water, I will not be moved. And so tenacious leaders who just refuse to go away. A compelling vision, and I'm reminded of the song, keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. And if you have a compelling vision, that helps for you to, when it's going well, to expand the movement, and when it isn't going so well, to hold on and keep your eyes on the prize that you're trying to achieve. For us, partnerships across other disciplines is important. And there's, this is often missed, but a willingness to go it alone in raising issues. And in earlier child welfare work, where I also did advocacy work, there is an insight that others are hoping your organization will step out when they feel unable to do so. I used to have many managers come to my office, close the door. I was a frontline social worker, and say, Paul, here's the issues that we have. Could you bring those forward through the work that you're doing with the British Columbia Association of Social Workers? So I know people in more formal, more powerful positions sometimes don't feel able to speak clearly their thoughts. So maybe your organization is able to do that. And also, there's a middle way, which is always moderation while making pointed analysis. So, to avoid rhetoric, to avoid extremes, to avoid being shrill, but to be pointed and to speak truth to power. And to always be carefully scanning for invisible issues like mental health care in long-term care settings. Next slide, please. So we have a document that was put together by Legal Info Nova Scotia and the college. And they said, remember, we actually do have power. There's nothing worse than learned helplessness and curling up in the corner and just saying, I have no power, there's nothing I can do. It's not true. So many of the most important policy and legislative changes have been as a result of individual people speaking up, telling government that this is not acceptable. I like animals, so here's my first one. I sometimes probably have appeared like a goat to people, strong-headed, but agents of political change. This is what I was taught when I was in school as a social worker, both degrees. And in my first 9 years in child welfare, I was first a diplomat, was always hopeful. Then I became kind of an agitator. Then I was suspended 3 times for speaking publicly, and had to find a way to do advocacy and keep my job. So after university, I found a space, and the space was under the British Columbia Association of Social Workers, which they have the association and the college out there separate. But I was able to speak and find a space that was safe, even though power would say there's no such space. But as long as I never referred to myself as a working for the ministry, and I never used insider information, and I spoke on behalf of another organization, I was actually able to speak, and I bet that's true here in Nova Scotia. It was confirmed by the association and the minister at the time. So if you're passionate about being an agent of change, you will find a path forward and a space where you can work. The next slide, please. But advocacy is a little bit, it's got a connection to marketing and, the ability to market your agenda or to be outstanding in your field. So it's not enough to have passion for your advocacy work. It's important that you can translate that passion to trigger something equally passionate in your audience, whether your audience is the public that you're trying to say, come along on this journey, or if it's the government that you're saying, you need to turn this way or that way. So, and you can do it with the ACE team has been 18 years without a budget. I hope we have a budget soon. But we've been able to conduct a lot of work, primarily by noting the invisible, hidden long-term care experiences, and then vividly making them visible to the public. And we do that partly by raising first-person voices. The old social work people are the experts in their situation. And some examples of that is during COVID, we wrote a long-term care visitation horror story report. Horror stories, that they tend to get media attention, and we got a lot of attention. 72 stories, 2 of them where people signed their names, 68 where they were still frightened to say anything about their experience. The Dispatches from Behind the Walls report, another kind of a marketing approach, but it aligns with giving your audience a vivid image. And this talked about the physical health issues, medical health issues that were going unattended in long-term care. It was entirely anonymous. But recently, we've come out with 3 briefs on medical nursing care, and those were written for the first time by a resident who is still a resident of a long-term care facility, and 2 nurses. So part of our making the invisible visible is make the trauma obvious. Next slide. And it's important to be bringing something new to the narrative. At least if the situation is not new, finding a new way to raise it. And for us, the first person voice has been very important. Next slide, please. Next slide. We're down to the one with the dot. Yes. So when you have a first person voice, there's certain dynamics that get created. First of all, it's hard for the government to argue with the direct recounting of a first-person experience. The first-person narrative is different from the official conversation. So the official conversation might be, well, we've created so many beds. And the first-person narrative might be, well, actually, I need a bedroom with a washroom for my human dignity and to keep me protected from infections. And in fact, that's what the province has now created as its standard, and I think that's part of our contribution along with others. And first-person voice, the powers are uncertain about first-person voice. They don't always quite know what to do with it. And powers uncertainty actually acts to your advantage, because power has power where you don't have that much and you need every advantage. So when they get a little uncomfortable, they're not quite sure how to respond, you have some opening to work in. So the ACE team has made use of the vivid antidote, the uncomfortable image, and then I'm down to the slide with the where we make it possible in publications. If you can just, yeah, there we go. So so in our report by the Kay Jocko, the long-term care resident, she showed pictures of her almost bursting catheter bag when she talked about the lack of care that she was receiving. She had a picture of a red bucket, and I'm sure it was some frustrated healthcare professional. She asked for a commode, and they said, there's no commode. Well, I need a commode. Well, here's a bucket, put it on the chair. And she took a picture of that. Very, very effective in saying the care that I'm receiving is substandard. And so we put out media releases quite regularly, probably 2 a month, reports, briefs to the government, and then we'll go to the next slide. And sometimes we try to find creative, innovative projects, as it were. So here's one of our projects that's happening right now. It's called the 24-Hour Challenge and titled, "We Are All Long-Term Care Residents." And next slide, please. So there's a history in Canada of people saying, politicians, I really want to understand the homeless experience. So they go out and spend a few nights outside, meet with the community of homeless people. There was Emery Barnes, who was a speaker in the BC Parliament, who lived on welfare for 30 days. So this immersive learning experience. And then because just like me, I'm a white privileged older man. What do I know about all sorts of issues? So the invitation this time, this project is, we've made a public invitation to Minister Barbara Adams and the Deputy Minister to join. So in a spirit of fairness, to join two ACE team working group members and to experience for 24 hours being an anonymous, a powerless, a dependent long-term care resident. And to further make sure that this was a real experience, the conditions would be that the person would take on a diaper or an incontinent pad, in a wheelchair, eating, going to bed, and receiving services as the staff decides they are able. And this was all anonymously. So we'll need the minister's help to actually go into facilities and set it up. We'll make sure that the facilities know their names won't be mentioned, no staff will be mentioned, and we'll sign forms that they have no health responsibilities. But these are creative projects, and now the minister often says, well, I was a physiotherapist in a long-term care facility, so I understand the whole situation. But as you know, there's a big difference between being the person who provides care, who has power, and the person who is receiving the care. And we're looking to expand her compassionate heart and expand our compassionate understanding for the people that we are representing and in conversation with. The ACE team continues to, the next slide, please. So when you're doing advocacy work, it's also, there's an element of self-confidence or the statement, we belong here. We belong in this public space. We're not shy about being in this public space. We don't, yes, we'll be, we're polite and we ask, we'd like to join you, of course, good manners. But at the same time, we expect that we belong here. And so the ACE team has done this by participating in the creation of major government policies. So in long-term care, one of them would be care by design. Now, the ACE team also worked with the current minister for 2 years on all the issues of bedrooms needed, the numbers, CCA-free education, hours of care that were needed, etc. So we just assume that we should be in those conversations. You show up, you start contributing to local efforts. This is a national effort where we were involved with 2 briefs to the HSO national standards for long-term care process. We have ongoing engagements with all sorts of government and community organizations. We attend face-to-face meetings with the seniors and long-term care minister and her team. And we have regular media releases. And in those media releases, the fairness principle always shows up. So if they've done something right, we cheer. And if they've done something that, or there's an area where nothing has been done, then we challenge. And the other thing we do is we always offer recommendations. If you're going to challenge, offer some solutions. And when you have a government like this one that says it's solution focused, then you can also remind the minister, the premier, that he is a solution focused kind of guy. And here's some of our solutions. Next slide, please. So other allied groups they're out there, and they have intersections with your particular advocacy work. And so we are always trying to find other allied groups to be in relationship with. So we've met with the LGBTQ plus community, the elderberries, and interesting other professional groups like the Occupational Therapists Association. We worked with them on the size of bedroom design for bariatric patients, and we jointly worked and surfaced an issue that they were concerned about in the new facilities that are being built. The next slide, please. So First Person Voices has led our work. And so during the height of COVID, the big first person voice was, we're being denied access to our loved ones. And this is even beyond the scope of health. The medical health officer was saying at certain times, okay, you can have 2 people go in, just mask up. You can have this, you can have that. Okay, now you can have many people come in. But facilities were often still in lockdowns. One facility down the road would be open, another one would be locked down. It was not about health, it was about insurance, it was about the reputation of having no one get sick. So we listened to that and produced reports, and you'll see some of the other reports in that slide. The next slide, please. In your sample letters to power, I'd like to go back to what Sarah spoke about, or no, Nancy spoke about, which was specific questions and asking for a reply. So if you write a letter, so you're speaking at them, you tell them what your issue is, be really clear what your issue is, maybe a little vivid story, and then you have, here's what our ask is, and you might even say, here's our recommendations, or here's my recommendations. So they know, what are you asking for, and what are you recommending should happen? And then don't be shy about only sending it to your MLA. You could do that, but you can do a quick Google search of the whole MLA contact list, send it to all of them, send it to the premier. There are no godlike figures that you can't send it to. So, we often maybe think, well, I can only send it to my MLA, but that's one person if they take it up, but if they don't, just send it to everybody. And CC your letter to healthcare allies that you want them to know what you're attempting to do, and maybe they will join you. Next slide, please. We have 2 to go. I know it's the end of the day, so I'm hoping that this is also inspiring and maybe a little bit entertaining. So to advocate takes various levels of courage. To advocate publicly under the official umbrella of the college is a very wise way to go. And you gather the strength of the profession to your social justice cause. And that saved my career, actually, because I don't, as a husband with wife and 3 children, I'm not sure what I would have done, because I felt impelled to continue to advocate, but I would have lost my job for sure, except when I went under the British Columbia Association of Social Workers. And it was 3 years later that they tried to suspend me again. And that's when the association stood up and said, no, you know, what he's doing is completely professionally legitimate. And the government came back and said, well, in fact, you're right. So I'm a big proponent for colleges and social work associations. You can advocate as a professional social worker without making reference to where you work. That's one of the rules. And there is space. So the space is under labor law, it's under human rights legislation, and often that space is, you can't use confidential information or insider information, but you can speak for another organization. Your government wants to control what their organizations are saying, and that's fine. You can advocate with partner organizations, which builds the strength of your movement. And you can advocate within your organization, and that's what many of us do. We advocate for changes in policy and these other things, or advocate for our clients. But there is a constraint, and that constraint, the chain of command. If you only try to advocate through your organization, you may experience so much moral distress that you become actually sick. And many social workers do become sick. My path was to then advocate under the association and find that safe space to continue speaking. But there is the last slide. There is something to advocacy which talks about without a safety net. And so advocacy does include risk, and especially to your upward career trajectory. So, you know, you may need to do a moral inventory and say, you know, where am I really at? What do I want out of my career? What do I want? How far am I willing to go with advocacy? Or maybe I'm going to advocate, you know, for good policy within the organization, and that's where I'm going to be. But if I never worried about career advancement. I love the front line, and so I really had no impediments. It was either just don't get fired, but I never wanted to be in management anyhow. If you're not willing to risk anything, though, you will attempt nothing. And so this is these are the folks, no offense, who go to the water cooler or sit in the lunchroom and complain about all sorts of things, and then go back and just work within the system and don't risk anything for change. And I think that's very unsatisfying. That's an unsatisfying experience. So safety is increased if you do it under defendable matrix, as it were. The Social Work Code of Ethics, the standards, you know, those are very important things that can defend your work as a professional. And sometimes you have to remind people, hey, I'm a professional social worker. I have a code of ethics. I have standards that I'm responsible to. You may call me a probation officer, you may call me a mental health worker, but I'm a social worker who is doing this work, and I have codes to live up to. There's no guaranteed absolute safe spaces, but there are rules and structures that make advocacy professionally safer. There is safety in numbers, and there's wisdom and balance in belonging to a recognized advocacy organization. You know, sometimes if I come up with an idea that's maybe too far out, somebody will say, whoa, 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 whoa. And that's good. That's good. And, or they'll tell me there's, we have a great idea, and I'll go, that's great, but here's where we're, likely to run up against really major opposition. Maybe we can figure something like that out, and keep ourselves intact, as it were. Now, I've given these, and I know that many spirited talks at the end of a day, well, it might have kept you awake. Some people might say, gosh, that was full of knowledge, but, we've had really heartfelt discussions. My heart goes out to everybody who suffers, who has moral distress, who, feels for their client. This is just a tool case, a tool bag that you can use, and I wish you all every success.
Thank you
Nash.
so very much for sharing some of your incredible work around long-term care, which we know is certainly contributes to a lot of mental health distress that a lot of people have, who, if anyone's ever worked in long-term care like I have, we see a lot of depression and anxiety. And of course, if that has ever been an example of structural factors influencing mental health, that's one of them. Thank you so much for helping us not only think about that particular issue, but also thinking about other ways of doing advocacy. One of the things that you've talked about is, as a retired social worker, your ability to speak up and do that advocacy. And there's been actually a growing number of retired or semi-retired social workers who have said that they want to dedicate themselves to creating some social justice advocacy. So if you are interested in that, just like a informal kind of just when social workers retire, what do we want to do as our legacy and as our outlet for the frustrations that perhaps we've endured having to follow policies that were not yet reflective of our values. So contact me about that.
Sure.
And if you're interested, also, I will have invite Paul to put the ACE information in the chat so that everyone can, who wants to join, can do that. We are going to be having some prizes, and you see Suzanne here. But before Suzanne and I do prizes, we are going to first invite Ella to join us with a closing prayer, and then afterwards we will come back for the prizes. So this was just to let you know that we have not forgotten that there's much more learning to be done. But first, we want to end on a good note. It's been a very intense day, and so I'm grateful to have Ella with us and to have Ella joining us to help us end the day in a good way. It's been a lot of heart and soul that has been shared. So we'll take this moment also to send love and light to everyone that spoke and presented today, for inspiring us and for everyone being here all day. So Ella, thank you so much for helping us close.
Hi, I don't know if my video's working, but
Okay.
anyway.
We're grateful for you. We don't need video to be able to hear spirit working through you.
Okay, I want to say thank you for all the presentations that were on today. There were some very heart-wrenching ones, and I'm thinking about the mental health. Like I think we're all going through a lot of things, and I know for me, I have a house full now. My son is here, and I have 3 grandchildren living here, adult grandchildren, mind you. So I used to live alone. Now I have a house full. But I'd like to pray for everyone who are working out there, everyone who is advocating for others. I pray that you continue to advocate and that you have strength in unity, and that your voices are heard by the people who are making the policies. There's too much suffering going on, and we need to make it less. And I pray that you all have strength and you have a good rest of the day. And we'll be talking to you. And sorry I can't see us. Anyway, Nogama, thank you so much.
Nogama and Willalan, thank you so very much. And we're so grateful to you for your support and for everything that you're doing. And so grateful for the ways in which you are blessing us today as we try to transform our experiences into advocacy and change. So grateful to all of our first voice speakers who have been with us throughout the day, and our panelists from this morning. And so grateful to the Canadian Mental Health Association, because we social workers are going to burn out and not say it right because of our own positionality and privilege. And our role is to be amplifying first voices and bringing people together so that it's not just the social workers advocating, but it's all of us collectively. We represent 99%. We can create the kind of world that we all want. And it takes all of our voices happening together. So this week, this is the week when we are wanting everyone to flood their elected representatives. So share our toolkit with others, invite other people to write letters, write some joint letters, write a letter and get a bunch of people to sign on, however you want to do